Welcome everyone. I've got a very special guest tonight on my show. This is probably a long time coming because I remember requesting an interview style conversation with this gentleman, well, back in 2014 when I started this channel. But we have known each other for at least a decade via social media on Facebook, and I'm speaking to none other than Dr. Jason Martineau, and he has been quite the inspiration for me over the years. He is an award-winning composer, jazz pianist, arranger, instructor, and has performed at countless venues and clubs all around San Fran, LA, New York. He's recently been featured in the Pian Francisco. What was that, Jason? Was that the Pian
This was a series of
Francisco?
events where pianos were placed outside and people would come, and I was one of the featured pianists for that series.
I remember seeing you post those. They were amazing. Just seeing you outside in nature playing the piano on the hills, in
Yeah,
amazing
there was one
locations.
with a big view of downtown and everything. Yeah, yeah.
Wow, that was awesome. So he's also an adjunct, part of the adjunct facility, and teaches at the faculty of the Academy Art University at San Fran Conservatory, and teaches music theory and production. But he is also an author and has co-authored this book, which I have. Let's see if this is going to show up. Okay, so this is the quadrivium,
There it
and
is.
Jason has authored The Elements of Music, which we're going to discuss a little bit of the contents there as well. And that's it there, yes. So that was 2011, I think you published that book. And you have,
Elements of Music. This
yeah,
came out in 2008.
oh, 2008, okay.
Hmm?
And you also have another one, which we will go into in part two, which is Love. Do you want to show them that one as well? Yes. So I'm really excited to have Jason on with us tonight because he's been one of these, I guess, I've been an ardent supporter and fan of his work and his creativity and his music.
Oh.
He has done, I think between us, Jason would every so often post little snippets of his piano compositions, just improv style, that I would absolutely love, because every time I hear something that he plays, it takes me to another time and place, and it sort of stops time, and I feel like a time traveler, and I'm always able to make up a little story in my head about these little, well, we joke around and I call them spontaneous combustions.
Right.
But they're really just, you just make these compositions off the fly most of the time when you're posting those.
Yeah, and that's actually what I was featured as doing at the Pian Francisco series as well. Spontaneous compositions. I call it comprovisation, meaning it's improvised in the moment and spontaneous, but you're composing it as you're creating it, right? So it's not just goofing around or random or something, right? You're looking for structure and patterns and development, motivic development, so that you can actually follow what's going on like a real composition.
Yeah. And when you're doing them, do you recall them later on? Or is it sort of you've created them in the moment and then you've sort of forgotten, but you do remember certain elements, but would you be able to replay those again?
Upon listening to them, sure,
Yeah.
but otherwise, no.
Oh, wow.
I mean,
See,
it's
that's,
always the first and the last time. I don't repeat figures or patterns or tropes or whatever, or certain. But if I say, oh, because I always watch them, right? And I choose what I'm going to put up, so I watch it and review it, and if I hear something I really like, maybe I'll develop that into a more extended actual composition, or orchestrate it, or for some other ensemble or what have you. So, sure, but not otherwise, no.
Well, that's probably why I was so drawn to them because I felt like they had this ephemeral quality where you've played them from a certain moment in time, maybe not to be recaptured again. It's almost like I don't know if there is a saying or a quote where they say just some moments aren't meant to be photographed or captured. Some moments are just meant to be experienced. And I feel like I catch a glimpse of that when you record it. And obviously when you record it, it's there, it's available. Um, but I
It's sort of
feel
a
like there's
right,
that element.
captured fleetingness, I guess, right? That,
Yes, yes, and trying to bottle that up. So
well, and
um,
mostly that's just because I want other people in on it, and if I'm home alone or in the studio and nobody's there, that's really the only means by which I can share it. You know, otherwise I do
yeah.
it live at those concerts or other places. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there needs to be a resurgence of that. I mean, I'm sure there is. I'm sure there is, but that is what's drawn me. I mean, to Jason's essence. You know, there's like a je ne sais quoi of when I hear it because I'm always concocting some sort of scenario in my head to every little piece that you've done that I like, and and they touched me so much. It's like I get gripped in this moment, and I've tunneled into this little wormhole of another time, place, dimension that I just make up in my mind.
Sure.
Um, but let's have a look at your the book, which I absolutely love. The way you write, the way you've tried to describe music in words, because obviously music and language. I mean, it's a whole sort of thing. You've likened it to music being a mother's lullaby.
Hmm.
And I love the way that you've written about its endless colors and nuances and diversity. And there is this bit that I love where you've talked about the texturization of the deliquescence of time, the ebb and
Yes,
flow of mood and meaning.
that's an
And
important line. I want to
yes,
share with you something about this whole first essay. These are like little essays, and that's the wooden book structure, right? They have like a sort of a spread, and there's like something here, and then there's images and captions and so on. This particular, which is really, other than the introduction, this is really the first chapter, right? In secret, this is written as if it were music. The essay
ah,
itself is it's poetry, or at least it tries to be. So you might notice there's a lot of alliteration. There's a lot of let's see, including that line you just mentioned. It's the texturization of the deliquescence of time, the ebb and flow of mood and meaning. It ruminates, vacillates, contemplates, stimulates.
I love that
Um,
bit. I have to say that again. I love that bit. Ruminates, vacillates, contemplates, stimulates. That's what I do when when I listen to your music. They are the four places that I go
That's
very
what music
intensely.
does, isn't it? I mean, so that's,
Yes.
in other words, I'm trying to embody what music is in the structure of the text itself, attempting it also to be musical.
Yeah.
But secretly so, right? I don't actually say I'm doing that, but that was the idea behind it. And you can pick up other spots where that's the case. As you've picked up that this chapter, "What is Music," is written as music itself
Yes.
to convey the idea to you, not just in the words as you read them, but in the sounds of the words as you read them. And you know what was interesting? I've there's since been, because this book's also in quadrivium, and between the two, this has been translated into 10 languages so far, and I have them all. So I've gone place to place and asked people to read me this particular page in their native
Ah,
tongue, because I wanted to hear whether the translator captured. Oh, I know I do hear the drums now. Yes. Um, wow. And I wanted to hear whether they preserve the same musical quality in the translation.
and did they?
The one that did it best, I mean, a lot of them did, yes. The Russian one wasn't very good, I thought, but the one that was absolutely amazing and better than the English, I think, was the Italian.
Ah,
The Italian
okay.
translation is mind-blowingly good. It just sounds way better.
Wow. But
You know,
there is a rhythm with the Italian language. I remember learning Italian at school, and there is a I don't know. There is a rhythm and a harmony to when you, because I still remember songs. I still remember, I could probably still sing an Italian song just because there was something about the language. I don't know. I'm not too good with it, but there is something that makes it easy to, you know, neatly
let's say it's already a musical language. Fair
yeah,
enough. But all of these words that I've chosen, some of which we don't hear every day in English, like deliquescence, for example, this melting away, right? They have the word, they have the same word exactly. Whereas in other languages, if the word wasn't native, they came up with some other term that approximated the meaning, but wasn't
mm.
musical. So anyway, I wouldn't. While I want to read some of the Italian too, I won't because I'm not really. I don't. I'm not. I don't speak Italian very well.
But
But anyway,
but you are going on. You do say that music is married to language, right? So it makes sense to make to what you
well,
said, make it, you know,
I say when music is married to language, in other words, song, right?
ah, yeah,
That then what is spoken becomes sung,
yeah,
elevating the intentions and entreating us to listen more. In other words, you and I are talking right now, but if you and I were talking right now, right, doesn't that change the sentence? It
yes.
pulls us in, right? And as I go on, it makes the profane sacred, and
Mm. And that's, I
so
suppose, why people love going to the opera, because there's that extra dimension and layer and element to the words, and as opposed to just reading them.
absolutely, of course, a lot of vibrato, perhaps, but the essence of it is there. Yes, I actually am more interested in like the Wagner model and post 19th century opera, not so much the aria recitative
Yeah.
model, which preceded all that, because that would seem very contrived. And the Wagnerian approach is a sort of endless melody. It's very just completely what we now understand as film score, right?
Mm.
That's where that comes from. It's late Wagner operas.
Well, you've also provided scores and done arrangements and compositions and soundtracks for a diverse, eclectic client base as well. So, how do you
Yes.
find that? Like, run me through. I mean, basically, how you go through the process of creating a score or a composition, like to something so, you know, a lot. I guess multidimensional, multi-layered. I mean, obviously, you consult with other directors and the creative directors of the other areas, but what's your internal process that you go through?
Right. Well, I mean, if it's for a film or documentary or what, and I didn't create that, then yeah, I'd simply just figure out what it is they're doing, what they're trying to get across, what the mood or emotion is. You look at the script, if they have everything marked up already, where they want in and out points, and it's not as esoteric as one may think. It's simply about, well, what's needed here, what's the genre of the. So for example, there was a documentary I did about a woman whose husband had died somewhat young and in a motorcycle accident, and they'd always had this running joke together that if he, like, what would the other do if one died before the other, as a kind of ha thing. And so he had said, well, she said, if you die before me, I'll scatter your ashes on Mount Shasta. And the joke was, so she was a terrible hiker, and the unlikeliness of this was extraordinary. Like, it would never happen, right? And and then he passed, and quite terrible and tragic and unexpected. And she then made it her sort of life goal to do exactly that, to spread his ashes on Mount Shasta. And so that's what the documentary is about, her journey towards doing that, right? So that was a very interesting story. And so
Ah,
I treat that mostly with string quartet and piano, and very light, because you don't want to overplay death.
mm,
You don't want to be too
mm,
maudlin about it, right? Or dun dun dun. It
mm,
has to be
mm.
gentle, and came up with some themes and motifs, and that's a normal practice anyway. When you do any sort of film or what have you, you usually have a primary theme or idea, thematic idea, and you associate that with various elements of the story, character, whatever it is, concepts, and then they evolve and transform over the duration of the story. So in this case, you know, it went from a very tough, dark, emotional, quiet type of writing, and then as the documentary progressed, by the end, there was a sense of rebirth and what, you know, yeah, he's still gone and all that, but she definitely got to a new place in her life with that, and the transformation around the Mount Shasta thing was part of her just dealing with the fact that he was gone, and it was redemptive, and so then the music becomes more awake and alive and positive towards the end. So
So
you
I
try to
guess
follow the narrative, you know.
okay. So you follow the narrative and it's
Exactly what you
thematic.
said earlier. Whenever you're hearing the music, the first thing that happens is you're getting narratives.
Ah, yes.
So that's there it is, you know. So this is just
Okay.
doing it the other way. The narrative is already there. So now
Yeah.
I'm following it, you know.
Do you ever, I don't know if this is a thing, but you know how they talk about method acting? Do you ever put
Mhm.
yourself into the place or of the protagonist within the story and imagine, I mean, what it might be like to be that woman or to be that man and sort of weave that in? Or do you sort of, are you from a distance more objective rather than subjective?
It's actually 3D. Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, I have to see it in three ways. I have to see it from the perspective of the audience who knows nothing, right? Because they're seeing it for the first time. I try to take it from the perspective of the characters in the story, and then I have to also take it from the perspective of the people who created the film or whatever it is, because they have a certain vision in mind. And so I have to kind of dance between all three of those if it's going to work. You
Mm,
know,
there's an
you have to
alchemy
think of the
there.
audience. You have to think of the
Yeah.
audience as well.
Yeah, and that's why I quite love different scores, film scores, and you know, compositions. And there's some of them are so memorable because they're so palpably connected to the narrative. So, for example, you know, like The Godfather, you would never the trilogy. You know, there are certain, especially part three, the final. You at the opera, the steps. There are just certain things that sort of
Oh yeah.
stick out. What's
Well, for feature
film
films, of course,
scores?
a feature film is a whole other animal. I mean, that's what you're
Ah,
just pointing to. That's as opposed to a documentary or a short film or a comedy. You know, feature films, the Titanic, you know, James Horner stuff, I mean, Avatar, all the Spielberg and John Williams collaborations. I mean, you can't. It's hard to imagine those movies without that music in it that you heard at the time. You know.
what's one film score of an epic movie or film that you really resonate with, or that you are really impressed by? Is there one that sticks out through the ages as that was remarkable?
Yeah.
That was you
Yeah,
know.
there are a lot. There are, I mean, let's be real. That's a very difficult thing to just pick one. But I will say, I guess, if I look, I have to look at my past selves when I first saw these films, because once I've seen them 10, 20, 30 times, or I've heard, you know what I mean? They don't have the same
Mm.
uh, mystery they did on the first hearing and viewing. But I think the one that strikes me, it struck me originally and still does, was not such a blockbuster, but it was a feature film, and you probably know it. It was called Somewhere in Time with Christopher Reeve and Jane Seymour.
Oh, although I
And
don't remember the score.
and the
That,
composer was John Barry, who's done a number of excellent. And so the love theme in this movie is extraordinary, and it's just so beautiful. And they mixed it with Rachmaninoff's D flat major Paganini variations, number 17 or whatever. Da 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 dee dum, da da dee da. You know that famous. So that was
uh,
also the love theme in the in the movie. But so between that and Barry's music, highly, highly effective. I don't know if you know the story. It was like
I'm going to be
Christopher Reeve
looking
is
at
an
it after this now.
excellent film. In fact, it has a little cult following because it takes place on some island not far from New York, where there's this giant hotel that's white, and people go there and they relive the movie as a so there's a cult
Oh,
following, as I've heard. But he's a
wow.
playwright, and I guess it was like late 70s, maybe early 80s. And he's sort of a failed playwright. He's not doing very well. And but there he is, and suddenly at one of the plays, some old woman comes running up to him and gives him some pocket watch thing, and she says, "Come back to me," and runs away. And everybody's like, "What the heck was that?" And he never saw her in his life. And then gradually he starts to discover, in fact, he goes to this place just to get away from his struggling career, and he discovers that the woman who came to him lived at this place, except she's from the past. And so he figures out a way through, self-hypnosis and God knows what, it's an interesting thesis there, premise, but he goes back to go find her. And indeed he does, and they fall in love, and I'll leave it at that, except that he gives her the watch. And so then it becomes this question of, well, where did the watch actually come from? You know?
That is
But anyway, great
that
movie.
is that's reminiscent of another film, more recent, with Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock. I think it was done in 2006. The
Lake
Lake
House.
House.
Yeah,
Yes.
right.
Yeah.
Well, and they're getting closer and closer somehow,
Yeah.
right? So, right. But
Right.
that's not really a paradox, though, but there was a genuine
Mm,
paradox somewhere in time. There's
okay.
another movie called, it's about a guy on a motorcycle. It's not much later, Dark Rider, or I don't know. And he ended up in the Wild West. He goes back 100 years. He accidentally drives into a military experimental zone in New Mexico or somewhere, and he gets transported back in time. And the
Wow.
same thing happens where he meets some girl 100 years prior. They fall in love or what have you. And he had something on his neck, and she rips it off his neck and takes it, right? And then, but when in the beginning of the movie, he has the thing, and somebody said in the present, and they said, "What's that?" And he says, "I don't know. My mother gave it to me. I don't know where it came from." So it was this mystery object that exists outside of the framework of the shifting time spans. It's quite
This
interesting. But
is,
anyway, back to
oh,
the
look,
original
this is
question. John Barry, the score for Somewhere in Time. John Barry.
okay.
Check it out.
I'm going to be checking it out. But just on this whole theme of time, this is very synchronistic for me that we sort of stumbled onto this because I have a huge fascination with time travel, and in fact,
Do you think it's possible?
I'm actually writing. I'm actually in the conceptual stage of a book that I want to write about this, and it is. I know with these things you're supposed to keep it quiet and on the down low so that you don't put it out there and have other people, but at the same time, I feel like you put it out there and there's accountability and now you have to go through with it. But it's all of a bit about the Adjustment Bureau and the time traveler's wife and then all this sci-fi stuff. I have such a strong connection to writing this that if by any stretch of the imagination it actually comes to fruition, and again, let's take a huge leap of faith, it becomes a movie or a film or a feature film, I would love you to write the film score for it. Let's
Yeah,
put it out
I
there into
thought you
the
were going there.
universe.
Sure, yeah, that'd be great. I'm quite intrigued with the subject as well. I mean, I'm not writing anything about it, but there's another film by based on a story by Mircea Eliade, who's known for concepts like the eternal return. I don't know if
Mm,
you've heard of this writer. Excellent. He's more of
vague.
a philosopher, thinker. Deals a lot
Okay.
with phenomenological aspects uh, of ritual and how it transcends time.
Yes.
But so he has a story that was made into a film in which the man keeps meeting the same woman in successive lives. Uh, right? In other words, so it's not just time travel. It's
Reincarnation?
reincarnation or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then there was another one where the guy's getting not older but younger. He's like going backwards, while
Like the
everybody else.
curious case of Benjamin Button?
Something, yeah, but not the same.
Okay.
I'd have to go find the name of it, but excellent films. Let me
Wow.
see if I can.
Well, this
Oh,
is
here it is. Youth Without Youth. Youth Without Youth was called.
oh, okay. All right. Youth without youth.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because the body kept getting older, I think is what happened. His mind was getting younger, but his body was going forward. And
Oh.
something like that.
Oh. Well,
Quite
I
interesting.
feel sometimes that, I don't know, being a Capricorn, they tend to say this about our sign, that we age reverse, in that the older we get, the more you youthful or younger in disposition we become. And I feel like that. Like I feel like I'm getting my the essence of innocence and purity and playfulness and childlike wonder. I feel like that's coming back with a vengeance for me. So I don't know what this thing but let's try and tie this back into the whole music thing, and this theme of life's vicissitudes and emotions, and how how they say that music can become soundtracks of our lives. Like, we'll listen to like a Prince album, and that was like in the 80s. People will remember their whole 20s or 30s, and it just happened to be the epic soundtrack for their love life, and so on and so forth. But um I kind of
No, nobody in particular, eh?
well, I'm a mega Prince fan, but
You are a Prince. Would I be wrong to say you admire his music a fair bit?
the music and the man, I think. And this is interesting because I'm also doing another interview with a fellow Prince fan about Prince and everything to do with Prince. But anyway, that's going off on another tangent. But this whole let's talk about this evolution of music. I know in your book you touch on or maybe it's me picking up on your seamless weaving. Okay, well let's
You were saying about Prince, but more generally, the music we hear, and particularly, would you say in our teenage years, do you feel that the songs that we encounter during those years make impressions, more indelible impressions than, say, songs you hear in your 20s or 30s or whatever?
yeah, I mean, the I know that music is a reflection of our times, but I find sometimes I feel like I'm stuck in certain eras because for some reason, say for the 80s, I'm a huge 80s fan, but I'm also a 1930s person, and some 1960s stuff. And do you know the movie with Owen Wilson, Midnight in Paris, where he goes back in time? And so there's
Woody
this
Allen.
there. Yes, there's actually a name for that. For people stuck in a different time era. There's actually I don't. There's a name for it. It's off the top of my head. Can't tip of my tongue. But do you find that there's this cultural consciousness that is embedded in these different times? Like, run through like your idea of the gestalt of different time periods. Like some from a musical perspective, you've had the Renaissance. I know you mentioned early on music was very monochromatic. There was just like one tone. I don't know if I'm getting the language right here, but one
Monophonic,
tone.
monophonic. Yes, yes. No
Monophonic?
harmony, just a melody, no harmony,
Yes,
right?
yes,
like
yeah,
like Gregorian chant. But wait, but we're saying a lot of things here. So first, you're talking about decades in the 20th century as one, right? Which already are each quite unique in their way. But then if you want to more broadly looking at this European tradition going back 1,000, 2,000 years, that's a much bigger conversation, obviously. But in both cases, we can say fairly that music from any culture, whenever it's made, is like an encoding of the shared consciousness of the people who made it, how they see the world, how they see themselves in the world, and how they see the world working. And
Mm,
that you can hear that in the music when we listen back to it,
mm.
and people later in time, right, as a historical record, figuratively and literally.
Yeah, yeah, and there's certain key elements of let's say I'm trying to pick up at something. Well, for example, you were saying in the Renaissance period when that sort of came about, and then it moved from mono, what was it again? Mono
Monophonic or monophony
monophonic to the
to,
tritones, and it was considered the church thought it was like the the devil's music. What explain
yeah,
that a
no,
little bit?
I didn't say I think
Not
you're
you, but yeah.
that's not in the book quite like that.
No, no.
Monophony or monophonic practice, this is one note at a time idea, gradually gave way to polyphonic music, multiple, two or more voices at once.
Mm,
Um, the tritone is another conversation, really, but um, the Renaissance in particular, if you look at what was happening in the Renaissance coming out of medieval era, was what? Secularization, right? It was less dominance by the church. And so more humanism, more beginning of the Enlightenment, you might say science even, right? So,
yeah.
and seeing through our eyes and not the eyes of God or what have you, perspective in art, um, gosh, and all the great artists there. So, and also new intervals. So we can say about intervals, the third showed up here quite and became a stable member of the harmonic palette. And the thirds are where we get this feeling of major, minor, big, small, hard, soft, right? Happy, sad, what have you. Although that's another conversation. But it's the flavoring of the emotional aspect, whereas the open fifths, bum bum, those stark intervals are much more structural, and they like the cathedrals, for example, they're much more resonant, but they don't have those shades of or nuance of emotion like thirds and their inversion sixths. So and you don't find thirds and sixths much at all prior to the Renaissance, really, or only in passing, perhaps. But in the Renaissance, they become included in the harmonic language.
Okay.
So in other words, that corresponds to, like I said earlier, how people see themselves in the world, how they see the world and themselves in it, right? And that's a mirror. The music is a mirror of what's happening around the people who make it.
Yeah, and I'm getting that you I recall you were talking in another interview about imperfect consonants and this inharmonious, the dissonance and the friction and tone clusters, and how
Hmm.
that's really evident in sort of like horror films and things like that.
Hmm.
And I never thought about it in the sense that you've elucidated in terms of being imperfect consonants and this that is used for freaky film scores and whether it's
Let,
Damien
let me
Omen.
clarify those.
Yeah,
We're mixing terminology here, so let's clarify that. So
yeah.
consonance is any type of two or more notes that blend well together. So there are perfect and imperfect consonances. So the perfect consonances are the octave, bum, 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 the fifth, bum, bum, the fourth, bum, bum. Those are the
Perfect.
perfect consonances, and also the ones you first find in the harmonic series, overtone series. Then the imperfect consonances are the thirds and the sixths, which just discussed, the major and minor, large and small. Da dee da da, right? Dissonance is what you're talking about, and right, and there's you could say there are gradations of dissonance, but they all fall into just like the consonants is a category. Dissonance is a category, and seconds, sevenths, the tritone, and yes, those you find, the psycho theme, right, in Hitchcock film, that loud cluster string sound. Those
Yeah.
well known. So dissonance makes people generally uncomfortable, or at least they feel more, it's more complex, let's say. Some people like it. I don't want to say it's right or wrong, good or bad or anything, but
Mm.
if there's more interference between the tones, then they're not as harmonious. And so if whatever's happening in the film is inharmonious, let's say, then the dissonance might be a better choice to support that.
Yeah, okay, yes. Because I had not really delved into that until it was explained, or you've explained it that way, or that I read into, how some of these horror films can be perceived in terms of, oh, so that's what they're using, like the do-do-do-do-do-do, or and there is a sense of the dissonance or these certain tone clusters that I don't tend to find in more, uplifting, harmonious, or the love thing. That it's just been so fascinating for me that I never really contemplated viewing it from a sort of a, not a left brain perspective, but trying to merge both hemispheres of the left and right to understand music from a different uh, perspective, if that sort of makes sense. Because a lot of the times we're feeling it from, I don't know, a very experiential soul level, or a heart level, or from the spirit. But then when you're constructing it, or when you're, you know, putting together a film score, or just any composition, and what's the narrative, there's this whole new world that sort of opened up to me that I never knew about, because I often feel, this is very strange. I have this strange thing with music. I have some instruments that I have, but I feel like in this lifetime I'm a frustrated musician. I feel like, I mean, we touched on that topic of reincarnation very, very briefly earlier, but I feel like I've played the violin and the piano in a past life, or at least strings, and some sort of organs. But in this life, for some reason, I have an electric piano, and I have a guitar. I have the Chinese erhu, I have
You have an
drums. I
erhu.
have
Oh.
yes, yeah,
Can you play the
yes.
erhu? Erhu is difficult.
I can't play anything in this life like properly, but there is this strangeness of, I have played this, and um, it's quite undescribable. But that's why I'm so fascinated with music, because I mean, I absolutely, I mean, like, who doesn't, who isn't affected by music? But then there are, artists and musicians that are sort of, it's their world, it's their passion. And yeah, I mean, I'm just looking at it from a different perspective. And you're in your book, you've got a section of epigrams and dialectics, which is this whole concept of ideas in sound. Can you maybe elaborate on what that sort of, this whole, um
Yeah.
what does that mean? Alliterations and things like that.
Well, alliteration is a poetic device, right? Where you have beginning of a word is shared. Live, love, life, laugh, right? If you make that into a phrase, and each word it sounds like they belong together, and it's a small little kernel of an idea. In music composition, on the academic side, it's called a motif or a motive, and the primary impetus behind Western music historically has been motivic development and developing variation. Dun 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 dun, right? Then what? Dun 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 dun, same thing, step lower. Dun 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 dun, dee 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 dee, right? That whole first movement of that symphony is built out of those notes and those rhythms and that interval completely. And the whole thing's organic in that way. So the idea of an epigram, just to make an analogy, because the part of the goal of the book was to take these uh, musical ideas and translate them into other like metaphors, so for like whether language, in this case language, so that people who are not trained in music might get that, they might understand the concept, but through another lens. So what's
Yes.
an epigram? Epigram is a, sort of a short phrase, right? Or collection of words, like an aphorism perhaps, but small, that is pithy and has some inherent uh, meaning and self-consistency to it, right? So that's the idea of the motif or the motive, it's the epigram. And what happens is typically music, it's the adventure of the epigram, going through experiences and transformations and uh, look at it this way, look at it that way, look at it upside down, and so on, right? Reverse it.
Yeah.
And then the dialectics are, you know, everything's in opposites, right? So that's a very strong principle in music is this sort of unity of opposites, these contrasting. There's really only three things that can happen, right? You can repeat it, you can do something different, or right in the middle of that, you have variation, where something's the same and different at the same time. And that's the sort of the fulcrum of the thing. So the epigram propagates forward through time, manipulated by the dialectic process of whether it's negation or you know, thesis, antithesis, synthesis, and that generates variation. And that's a lot of Western music in particular works that way. I would even say some like Indian music also. What happens in a rag, you know, there's the raga or
Uh-huh.
rag, and that is a loop basically, as is the tal, the drum pattern, and both of those things cycle through time, and they definitely go through a series of variations, and it involves a lot more improvisation. And there are definitely sections, but it's a similar process. So even if you hear music you're not accustomed to listening to, if you listen for this thing happening, this phenomenon where, you know, things repeat, they tend to come back, right? Or they tend to
Yeah.
repeat in close proximity, and then they undergo minor transformations as it goes along. And if you can track those,
Yeah.
then you can follow the music.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's the idea of epigram and dialectics was to illustrate like these are the principal modalities by which music develops across time.
Ah. And then adding those little elements to emotional to language or to the lyrics as well. I guess that's what adds that extra, intensity, I suppose might be a word, to why we're so drawn into certain songs and things like that.
Well, there's a bit
So
of a mirror there if you think about it.
yeah.
So like tell me if this melody would work with these lyrics. Somewhere over the rainbow. Didn't work. Why not?
Yeah.
I went
In
down.
reverse.
How
Yeah.
about somewhere over the rainbow, right? Now the
Yeah.
words are being
Yeah.
mirrored by what the music is doing, literally. It's going up.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. And then I suppose then you have the very creative types that probably want to play with the boundaries. Do you think perhaps like there's like a trickery or a deceit in how some
Oh yeah,
music is, or you think that it's going to
sure.
it
Cole
sounds
Porter.
like it's, yeah, that's what I
Every
love.
day, every time we say goodbye, right? Later in that song, he goes from how strange the change from major to minor, right?
Oh.
Or um oh, Leonard Cohen, Hallelujah, right?
Oh yes. Oh yes.
That first verse is brilliant because what does he say? He says, it goes like this, it goes like this, the fourth,
The
and that's the
best.
fourth of the scale. Bum 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 bum.
Oh.
Four chord, fourth. It's actually the sixth of the scale, but it's the four chord that he's playing at that time, the fourth chord. Fourth, the fifth, and he plays a five chord. The minor fall, and that's the minor submedian, A minor. The major
Major
lift, back to
lift.
F, and then G, the five, the baffled king composing, and then back to E minor, three, hallelujah, and the A minor. So again, I mean, that's a very literal case, obviously, but he's just what the music's doing is being described in the lyric, exactly. And then sometimes it's the other way around. What the lyric is
Wow.
saying, the music is embodying. That's more the somewhere over the rainbow model.
Wow. I mean, the more you're explaining it, the more it's becoming even more fascinating for me to actually comprehend this emotionality and the tone and you know what sort of what you read between the lines or what's alluded to or what's hinted at, I guess a bit like maybe paintings. And I mean, you yourself are a painter and you're very creative in the arts, and I've seen some of your work, which is absolutely amazing.
Thanks.
I mean, I know
Let
we're
me ask
sort
you a
of,
question on that point, in case you're segueing. I don't want to leave this just yet, because I
yeah,
have another one. I have a great example for you that you're going to be able to relate to. So,
okay.
Prince, right? Prince. Think of When Doves Cry, right?
Yeah.
We- right. Um, so if I were to tell you that there is an instrument missing in that song that is never missing in almost any Prince song ever, could you reflect on that for a minute and recall, without listening to it at this moment, and just think back and say, but what instrument is it that would be there but isn't?
Bass.
Right. There's no bass.
I'm guessing
Now,
because,
here's the
yeah,
question. Why not? There's a reason.
he's taking out,
How,
is it, mm, okay, so my head's suddenly gone to bass is generally like it's like, is it like the foundation? Like when they say the base, it's like
right,
the root, the
right.
foundation.
It's
And that
grounding.
song, yeah, it
And that
without
song,
family, parents, and if you don't have that root and that stability and that's gone, that's why it's so powerful. Oh my God.
so there you go. And if you were to play the song and play a bass line with it, dum, 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 right? How can you just leave me standing? Dum, 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 right? It just wouldn't have that, like, it'd be like a cool groove. It wouldn't have all that insecurity and
Oh,
uncertainty, right? And ungroundedness. You nailed it. You got it right on the head. So I think,
holy
yeah,
wow. You mean that was a shot in the dark? That was like completely like, I had a feeling that there was something, not something missing, but there was like a gap, a hole. I just felt like there was a tension. There was this terse. There was this, when someone tries to pull the rug from under you, there was some element of that in that song, but
yep,
I didn't.
yep,
And I just went,
yeah.
oh, bass. Like that's the one that everyone should have in everything, shouldn't they? So,
Oh, you guessed it for that reason. I see. I mean, maybe my question was too leading, but yeah, listen to the song, later,
I,
and because
I
most people, when I
will.
bring that up to them, they don't. They say, "There's no bass, really? No, come on, there's always a bass. What do you mean?" And then we listen to it, and they're like, "Wow, yeah." And
Yeah,
I
and I know
even didn't
nothing
realize
about
it at
music.
first.
So, but
Well,
my
you can
thing is,
recognize a bass,
well, but the thing is, I'm
right?
trying
You can hear
to,
something, and go, "Oh, that's the bass."
yeah, yeah. And I think, I guess why I'm so fascinated and drawn by you, and I know I may have mentioned earlier before, way yonks ago, whether you're a polymath, but because I see you, you're able to, dance with the music and the creative arts and the writing and the photography, and then there's some sort of um
They're all related to me.
yeah, there's an alchemy
They
there
are,
where some people might focus on one, two, or three elements, but because you're able to, and
which is
juggle is
fine.
not the right word, you can you seem to be able to translate this ephemeral creative alchemical quality that I pick up, that I resonate with, and that I'm really yeah, like impressed by, but on a soul level, like on a spiritual soulful level, that I know that I have, but I'm not able to articulate as well, or I'm not able to express as well. But I suppose that's why we're all drawn to various different types of music, because there's an unspoken quality that music has that maybe words alone can't, or um
Well, right, and vice versa, I suppose. But
mm,
I would. It's a little weird, I would say, and I think I indulge it most in the spontaneous combustions, because
yes.
there's a very distinct feeling when doing that, and I don't want to get all woo about it, but that it's not you, it's not that it's coming through you, but you're not doing that, you know.
Oh no,
Uh,
please go,
uh,
please get woo.
When it's happening. No, I mean, you obviously have to like practice and you have to learn your instrument, right? You need to start, I mean, nobody's sitting down and just stuff's coming out like that. But you can hear it like, so Keith Jarrett, you remember, he's still alive actually. Keith Jarrett, pianist, jazz, not just jazz, classical, like he's done everything on the planet. The most highest selling solo piano album in history was the Cone concert by Keith Jarrett.
Oh,
It was
wow.
improvised concert, completely improvised, and it's really
Wow.
amazing, exceptionally good. But so the point is, when any decent musician sits down, that you can tell when they're just doing their thing that they've practiced a million times and they've made it all perfect and it sounds perfectly fine and great and what have you. But the improvising lot, and the jazz musicians as well, but not just jazz, any music that's more spontaneous. There's a moment where you can hear where the shift happens and where, because it's not just there on demand, right? It's just like when you meditate. Yeah, you
Mm,
just sit and boom, you're there, right? No, it takes a while.
mm,
Uh, and then it might take quite a while. And so basically I'm there exploring and ruminating and trying to get out of the way, put my mind quiet, right? And don't edit or watch or just and eventually it does click in, and so it's autopoiesis. It's a self-creating, self-sustaining mechanism of some kind. And when that kicks in, it then at that point you feel like it's not, I'm not doing this, is not me, and
yeah.
it's not uncomfortable, it's blissful, it's a little frightening
Yeah.
actually in some ways, but in a good way, because then it's just like, whoa, I never played that before. I'll never play it again unless I try to or choose to. Um, but I have to listen to it and all that. But yeah, and the same with, I would say, any of these. So that's the point of the creative process in general, right? When you get lost in what you're doing, who's
Mm,
doing it?
yeah. It's the
If you're
flow
not there,
state
you
that
know,
people talk about,
flow state,
right?
absolutely, absolutely, 100%.
Yeah.
Well, why do surfers surf?
Yeah.
You know, and so that's what it is, and meditation. I think it's a meditation. And I
Mm,
often put in my hashtags. I put meditation, right? Or tonight's meditation. That was my running caption for those things on Instagram,
yeah. It's
because they're meditations.
and you're right, something, and people talk about this when it just comes through you and you're like just
Right.
the conduit or the channel for it.
Yep.
And
Absolutely, 100% right.
yeah. And
That is a real
that's
thing. That is definitely
I believe
real.
so.
I don't know where it comes from. I wouldn't venture to guess, but there's definitely a feeling like, whoa, just that's not me. But there is,
Oh, yeah.
you're called upon to handle it, like, because it can burn you up, if it's
Mm,
powerful stuff, right? If you
mm,
have to be willing to feel. I guess actors do that too, right? Like they have to be able to embody whatever it is they're doing there, and it has to transcend that the individual who's portraying the character. And when that transcendence happens, then yeah. So you think of like an Edith Piaf, right?
mhm.
She had a really hard life and all that, and when you listen to her singing, and whether you like it or not, it is good for her what it is, and it's highly deep and expressive, and it's
Yeah.
transcendent a lot of the time,
Yeah.
and there's very difficult emotions. So it can burn
Yeah.
you up if you're not careful.
Yeah.
Um,
It-
you have to be able to handle whatever it is that's gonna run through you.
well, I mean, without going too woo, I guess it's like when they make the analogy between, let's say you're a 40-watt socket and you have 4,000 volts going through. You're not going to be able to handle that.
Yeah,
You have to
it's
have
just
the
it's
right.
very much like that. Yeah,
But
yeah.
you
Not always
touched,
like that, but yeah.
well, you touched on a little bit of when you said it does feel like a not a responsibility, but it feels like a sacred gift that should be nurtured respectfully, but that it can also be freaky. You said it could be a bit eerie or freaky or scary, that you suddenly all of this, not power, but there is something
Cool.
flowing through you, coursing through your veins, like, and
Well,
it's like, oh, it's not me.
imagine feeling. Yeah, I would. Imagine feeling it's like you're inhabited. You're right that you're possessed, and energy's running through you, and there's a distinct feel. And while you're sitting there doing this thing, playing an instrument or whatever, and creating on the in the moment, and it's creating itself is what it
Mm.
feels like. And so yeah, that can, if you focus on it too much, first of all, that's bad because it'll probably drop. It'll stop work. It'll go back down. It won't continue. But there's a real sense that it's not you, and yet it's in you, and you think everything that comes for you must be you. People say, "Oh, you played that. You just played that half-hour concert. That was cool." And it's like, yeah, I played about 10 minutes of it actually. The other 20 minutes, I have no clue, right? So then like, well, who was that? So that's not, it's freaky, and I don't know, that's not really the right word.
But a good freaky. I think it's a good
Yeah,
freaky.
good freaky, right, right. It's like, well, there's that mystery. It's like, well, what the heck is that then?
Yeah. And
That's and the sensation of it. It can be quite something. And so when you listen again, Keith Jarrett, he's known to have been a very loud pianist. Like he would ululate and right and yell and do all kinds of, make a lot of noise. But if you follow and listen to what he's doing closely, you understand why, because he's having that same reaction. He's going, oh, oh, like he's just blown
yes,
away by what's happening.
yes,
Not because he's an arrogant,
no.
proud guy or whatever, although he is intolerant of people who cough, and he's not very friendly to the audience, I suppose, but as I've heard. But however, you have the feeling that's you did something that you don't otherwise know yourself capable of doing, and where did it come from, and what was that, and holy shit, that's kind of what it is.
Yeah, yeah.
You get used to it though.
Wow. I feel like those transplendent moments. I know with meditators, it can be that it's that sweet spot that everyone sort of strives for without trying to really, seek it out. But consciously they're like, oh, I want that
The
moment again.
paradox. That's the
Yes.
paradox, right? You have to try not to try, which means you can't
Yeah.
try or not try either. Otherwise you get, and then so that's exactly how it is when you're this creative, spontaneous creative process that I'm referring to is the exact same thing. You get out of the way. No
Mm.
self-watching, no self-analysis, no criticism, no self. Right? I
Wow.
mean, that's really the goal of that is guess what get out of the way means. So
Yeah.
stop editing and stop looking. When you're meditating, that first half hour is monkey chatter, blah blah blah, right? It's still you in there. Doesn't really. It's only when you get to that next stage and that drops, then it's like, oh, I'm just pure awareness,
Uh-huh.
right? And Jason is just a thing, a constellation of ideas and memories and experiences that exist within that larger awareness, and that larger awareness isn't me,
Yeah.
or it's not me with the capital M that I thought I was. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Just
it's
an
the
arrangement of
Buddhist mind.
molecules and DNA.
It's
but,
kind of a
but
Buddhist thing that they talk
very
about. There's
zen. Yeah.
Zen Buddhism, yes,
Yeah.
Theravada, a few, yeah. So there's similarity there across, and I don't want to say that improvising music is Buddhist. I'm just saying that various
No.
traditions have sprung up independently that are all pointing to the same
Yes.
phenomenon that we have collectively. Yeah.
And then, I mean,
So
just to make a point on what you mentioned earlier about, learning to play. I think there was a quote, and I remember posting it years and years ago, that you sort of learn to play the notes, you learn to play by the rules. And then once you know how to play it, you throw them out the window and then you play, you know,
right,
by your heart, with your heart, you play from
right.
your heart type thing. And I always remember that. And I feel like that is that life, by the time we hit middle age, it's like we've learned to do the things that we're supposed to do, get a job, da 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 da. And then all of a sudden, people have these, well, some people have these midlife crisis, or like this whole rejuvenation, and they go off and get rid of their corporate degree, and they go off and you know create some hand-woven art by the side of the lake, or you know, there's like this
Well,
whole
yeah, I think the human life is has more complex, has multiple phases or stages, like every 7 to 10 years, versus being one steady
yeah,
trajectory with a middle. I
yeah. I
think
mean, there's
that
different
that can
arcs.
take many different spin-offs and stuff across a lifetime. I have a
Yeah.
client right now who's in her 60s and doesn't even need to, she's happily married, doesn't need to work or anything, but she's decided, I need to get a master's in psychology. And now she's off to go do that. No
Well,
real reason other than that's what she wants to do. So good for her.
yeah, yeah. I feel like that's happening. There's just, I feel like there's just no rules anymore. I mean, I'm one of these people that I don't have a steady, full on vocation career. Every few years I'm learning something new. I'm in a different career. I mean, I'm on to my fourth degree, and I know people bag, oh, you know, people that have degrees, but it's not. I didn't even go to my last two graduations because it wasn't about that. It wasn't about that. It was just I really wanted to jump. You know, I'm so when something fascinates me, I'm there, and usually I'll have three or
Yeah.
five things going on in the background at the same time, and I don't talk about them. I feel like for me it's just an experiential thing, but music and passion, like that, it's just frustrating because in this lifetime, and we're going back a little bit with the reincarnation thing, but I feel like because I feel like I did it in another lifetime or two or three or whatever, I have a resonance with it. I know. Oh, we touched on it briefly just when you were saying, well, um, people learn and stuff like that. But what about the little kids at 2 or 3 that learn to play these amazing pieces? And you think you could not have learnt that at 2 or 3. Like, surely you must have something reincarnated within you. Surely there must be some
Well, no,
spirit.
nobody's born playing well. Not Mozart didn't pop out playing
Right.
arpeggios. Everybody has to learn how to use their
But
equipment and
but
what have you.
but
But
what about these
um,
3 or 4 year
there are,
olds that
yeah, yeah, no, I'm going to go there. Well, so there are people who, there are predispositions. There
hmm,
are, well, let's call them perspicacities. Like it's not the right
love that
word, but
word.
yeah, I mean, perspicacity is a one idea, right? It was just
Hmm.
a certain lucid ability to understand this or that. But I'm sort of turning it into a neologism, and I'm saying perspicacities, like faculties, like
Yeah.
abilities. Um, you know, Artists, painters, maybe they have more sensitivity with their eyes and color. Musicians have more acuity and sensitivity with sound. So they'll gravitate in that direction because it brings them that added juice, it makes existence more fiery in that domain. Um, People with taste, special ability with, they might be a chef or what have you, right? In other words, you gravitate towards things for a reason. I mean, it could be, I don't know about past lives. I can't, it's like God.
Yeah.
You can't prove or disprove it. So I can't really prove or disprove reincarnation per se. But I felt, when you think of synesthesia, and you think of this, some people we all have certain things. Everybody's good at something, and we're not all good at the same things, right? And so if you gravitate, and if you're fortunate enough to be allowed to gravitate to the things you feel drawn to when you're a child, and then you nurture that, you're bound to be good at it. There's just no question. You've got that interest and
Yeah.
perspicacity, right?
Yeah.
I don't like this word talent, because that just makes it sound like, you have to be blessed with this
Yeah.
magic
I
thing,
hear you.
otherwise sorry for you. And I don't think that's true. And the most talented people in the world, it's like, if you don't work hard and put endless time into this thing, you're not going to get better at it. And
Yeah.
anybody who's good at anything has put an enormous amount of time into it, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. I mean,
That's talent.
um, I interviewed someone many years ago who has the same belief, and he believes he doesn't like the word talent either, and he's all
It's
about
loaded.
skill development. and
Right.
developing that skill. But I
Married
still,
with this perspicacity thing that we're talking about, right? There's this that some
sure,
people hear a little more clearly. Some people smell a little better. Some people, what you know what I mean? That they have
yeah,
that better uh, distinction of different colors.
okay, okay.
We don't.
I get
That's how I
where,
would see it.
yeah, I get where that comes from, and I know people may not like that whole, but what do you think of the whole thing about genius and insanity, and because a lot of artists and painters from days of yore have had
Yeah.
so much channeling through them, but there has been this kind of,
Well, that was what I was pointing to earlier. If you're running all
yeah,
this stuff through you, that's not you, or at least doesn't seem to be, it can take a toll. It's not easy, and it can burn you up. And maybe the opposite is true. Like depressives might just already have that obsessive quality, which then would make them more predisposed to artist life or musician life, where that's all you do every day, and is that thing.
right, right,
It's hard to say which way that goes. But I don't
mm,
think it's controversial to observe that different people are skilled at different things,
yeah,
right?
I,
And
yeah.
predisposed,
Well, see,
that's
you
okay.
say predisposed, and I
Yeah,
still,
they
I
evidence
still,
the predilection very early on without any prodding or you know what I mean? Like if you see people who are drawn to certain things early on,
yeah, yeah.
kids
But I
drawing,
still think that could still be, and I know the word talent seems to just not. It feels
yeah,
like, oh, you've
I'm
been
just
favored
not
by
using
the
that word though.
gods. Yeah, but that's the
I'm
thing.
not
Like,
using that word. Well, for example, I'll give you an example. I took part of a very big test, the genetic test years ago, a wide countrywide sample. I don't know how big it was, like 20,000 plus people, and they got a bunch of musicians and gave us they gave us two tests. One was a pitch perception test, and so they were looking for this perfect pitch question and whether it's genetic, whether
ah,
the ability to identify notes in out of thin air, is if there's a gene, or is it a DNA thing, or what is that, so, and they did find a location in the genome where people who had that gene expressed. So that could be right, and it doesn't mean everybody who has that is going to be a musician, but everybody who's a musician of a certain caliber and professional level and what have you, and claim to have that ability, did have that, because then they did the DNA test and then we had to send a swab and all, and they, North Shore, it was North Shore
okay.
Hospital. Anyway, so they found, so I don't think that's controversial to say that there are
Hmm.
heritable competencies, or not even that. What I said earlier, perspicacities, even though that's not the right word. Some people are more acute at certain sensory at processing this type or that type of sensory data than another,
Hmm.
and
Okay.
that's okay. It doesn't make them better or worse, and it doesn't mean people who don't have that can't be an artist or a musician or a poet, or right. Of course not. It
Right.
just means those are the people who don't need the prodding. Let's say they don't have to be told to go practice the piano. They have to be told to stop.
Hmm. Well, okay. So let's play a little bit of the devil's advocate here. So,
Absolutely.
um, I understand what you're saying. I totally, and I see, and agree. From that perspective, from one perspective. But then people will say, well, sure, I might not sing like, XYZ, or play the guitar like, whoever, Jimi Hendrix or whatever. But those people, yes, they've honed that degree, and yes, they have a predilection or not even going to try and say that with perspicacity, or they have a but do you not think there is something else going on that we were saying that maybe touches on the woo or the divine that also courses through, and that doesn't, it's not that that makes them
Possibly,
special, but it just that they've got
possibly,
this
yeah.
added extra
Well,
element.
you want to. Well, I mean, there's your life. Like, what were the conditions of your life that might have
Yeah.
pushed you in the direction of retreating to the solace of an instrument in your closed room at night, versus listening to
Yeah.
people argue or whatever it was. Um,
Yeah.
I want to add, by the way, that even among like professional musicians, the percentage of them who actually demonstrably have perfect pitch is extremely small. So
Mm.
the vast majority of musicians don't have that ability, and a very small percentage do. So that's
Oh,
not, what I'm trying to see. It doesn't mean you need that in order to do that. Not at all, because most of them don't have it. That's what I'm trying to say.
okay.
But that was something they were, because that's an unusual thing in and of itself. I mean, there's Einstein.
Yeah.
There's people who have mathematical mind better than the next guy or the next girl.
Yeah.
What are we going to do about it? That's it. Some
Yeah.
people are, and some people are better with cooking, and some people are better with science, and some people are better with writing. I mean, J.K. Rowling, right? She's apparently a great writer. Look at how many she's touched an entire generation of people. Like what an amazing, like, right? And or Anne Rice. I'm sure, did you
Mm.
like her
Oh,
stuff?
I had all her books.
Yeah. Why
Yeah.
are some writers so successful? Forget the cultural milieu for a minute, although that might have something to do with it, but they're
Mm.
obviously good writers. They're obviously
Yeah.
good writers, and other people aren't as good. What are we going to do with that? It's okay. Not everybody has to be a novelist or a right, or a poet or whatever. But we can all write
Yeah.
something. We all write on social media. So I
Well,
don't know any beyond that. I don't like the Wunderkind idea at all, because that makes that's
mm.
sort of an elitism, and it
Yeah.
makes people feel like if they don't have that,
Yeah.
then they can't enjoy it at all, and that's just not
Yeah,
true.
no, well, that's quite an extreme. Yeah, I mean, you should be able to, if you can't belt a tune, you should still be able to sing from your soul and from your heart because you just want to
Yeah,
express, not because you want
sure.
to win a
My
Grammy.
grandmother was tone deaf,
Oh,
completely tone deaf, could not
okay.
carry a tune to at all. She just went la
Wow.
la 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 la. No,
Yeah,
no
wow.
sense of the notes whatsoever.
But still didn't stop her from
She loved
singing and
music.
humming. Yeah,
Well,
wow.
right. But and I asked her, so I don't know how what music sounds like to her. Like I wonder if she hears it the same. Does
Oh,
she
that's
hear it the way she
interesting.
sings it, or is it just that she can't create the notes? I don't
That's
know.
interesting. That's
That's
interesting.
equally interesting as the other side of that coin. I was going to say Mozart, just to top that off. Were it not for Leopold, his father, Mozart, dragging him to every court in the land and drilling everything into him from like the age of 0, he might not have become a pretty decent composer. In other words,
Mm,
his father was a court musician and monetized his son and drilled it into him, right, from a very
wow.
young age. And
Yeah,
so, were that not to have happened, that's a big part of it. This is what
yeah,
I'm
for
trying to say.
sure. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I mean, there's somebody in my family who I know, I won't mention
We're
exactly.
talking nature nurture, right? It's kind of
Yeah,
half and
nature,
half, probably.
nurture. Yeah. Well, so I mean, literally, maybe he was 2, 3, could barely speak, but yet we're singing folklore songs from our country. So nobody trained him. Nobody, but he just seemed to know.
He couldn't sing, but he couldn't speak, but he
He
could
could
sing.
speak it, but he could sing these old folklore songs from our country, and it was like everyone would just
Oh,
laugh.
that
They'd
he'd
like,
never heard before?
no, no, no,
Oh, well,
and
that's another whole, right. Or
that's
people
it. Well, they're
born
yeah,
speaking, or they have a head injury and suddenly they can speak fluent Chinese or something. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, like, he
I don't know.
lost it
I've
when he
seen
grew
those
older.
stories. Yeah. I don't have
Yeah,
a huge view on what's at work there, but yeah, I've heard some of those stories.
yeah,
Polyglots, or yeah, uh,
mm,
how can they
yeah.
know that?
Yeah, well,
They
that's the
never
thing.
learned it.
How could they know that? And so, I mean, that just fascinates me. But let's talk a little bit about
Oh, well, I'll leave you with one idea there.
Oh,
It's
okay.
my belief that the brain is an antenna,
Mm-hmm.
not a storage,
No.
not a file folder or hard drive. I think that
Yeah.
our minds are antennas.
Yeah.
So I'll go on record to say just that. But the implications of that, I don't know. But I do believe that, because how could we possibly hold all the experiences, stories, memories, songs, colors, flavors, sounds, and not only of our personal lives, but in the lives of our friends, in books, in movies, in sitcoms. I mean, to think of how much you know,
Yes, yes.
how many, and how vast that is, and languages and whatnot. And you think that all is just somehow
Mm,
sitting in here. It doesn't
mm.
seem possible.
And there are also, we do place a lot of emphasis on it all being up here, but I also think, I mean, the heart is a second brain as well. And when it comes to love and emotions and music and just memories, um, it's not all up there. It's and some maybe it's non-local in the field, and I guess we get quantum here, but that's a
Well, and that's what I'm
that's
leaning
a separate.
towards. Yeah,
Yeah,
when I point here, I don't mean just the mind or the brain, the
yeah,
physical brain. Obviously, there's muscle memory, there's,
yeah,
embodied memory, memory is stored in your whole body. It depends what it
yeah.
is, right? Like my hands doing this is partly autonomic, partly amygdala, partly cerebellum. It's a whole
The
gestalt. And then we
whole
have distributed
gestalt.
cognition, like you and I talking right now, right? In other words, now it's a two minds that are trying to act as one larger mind, and then that's what hive minds are, right? And that's collective unconscious. That's
Yeah,
kind of
and it
the internet in a weird
creates
way.
the third, like the transcendent function, which then goes into Jung a
Right.
little bit, but that's a separate
Exactly
topic
right.
as well, which we both have
Well, we're just
mentioned.
starting to get inklings of this, right? There's a lot of
Yeah.
current podcast thinkers, smart people talking about egregores. Have you heard this term,
Uh-huh.
egregore? And what they're pointing at is a supra
Mm-hmm.
level. It's not an entity, but it's a thought form that runs in that sort of above the level of the individual or the conscious distributed cognition, because postmodernism has kind of diluted a lot of that, right? It's like it's trapping us all in our lonely minds. There's no reality, everything's infinitely interpreted and so on. At the same time, there's this egregore idea where we get swept up in waves and pendulums and larger patterns that you see in the way starlings fly. Certain
Yes.
wasp nests have these undulatory things they do.
Mm.
It just seems all coordinated,
Mm.
and yet, but we don't. But there's nobody there going, okay, go. That's not.
Dun,
What's
dun,
doing
dun.
that?
There's no composer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the
Yeah.
egregore idea is interesting, and that suggests that may indeed be that distributed cognition has structure and pattern to it that it's hard for us to perceive or understand, because we're at a we're a part, we're a subset of that, right? So that we may be getting closer to this idea, and it might actually be something there. Yeah, I don't know yet.
Yeah. So it's a different kind of hive consciousness, but where do you see the evolution of music in terms of our consciousness and the evolution of consciousness? I mean, they're saying you obviously would know about AI can create music pieces now and can create symphonies and then did the whole
Yep.
sort of digital music and where
Not
do you
very well.
not yeah, I
I
was
haven't
just
heard anything
say
that compelling in musical AI experiments yet at all. I mean, it's novel, but it's not art, or it's not transcendent. So, but where do I think it's all going? That's a hard question, because it depends on which type of music. There's as commodity. There's music as furniture. There's muzak. There's background music. There's so-called art music or concert music, and then there's, as we said earlier, film music, and then there's world music, and there's lots of different
mm,
types of music going on out there. It's not just what we do in the West. It's a big world, so that's a hard question. When I watch, so like Billie Eilish, Billie Eilish and her brother Phineas. Have you heard of them?
I know Billy, but I
Okay.
do not follow a lot of mainstream
Well,
or
he
any.
performs with her a lot. It's her brother, and he
Ah,
does
okay.
he's the guy who does all their producing and of the
Ah, okay.
music and stuff. And they grew up together, whatever. But when I watch some of these live concerts on YouTube and stuff, um, these are religious rituals, 100%. These are like
Ah,
massive religious rituals. There's
yes,
no question in my mind, and just the way it's all laid out, the people
yes,
chanting the words, and it's far
yes,
more powerful than church or
yes.
modern day religion. It's massive, but nobody would ever call it that. They say it's a music
Well,
concert.
well, no, actually, and without wanting to go into that territory, you'll find that a lot of conspiracy theorists have been onto that for quite some time now, that the concepts are actual religious experiences. Uh,
Well, I think they are, but there's nothing nefarious. I mean, humans have that hole in their soul that they have to act it out in some way, and if they're not getting
yeah,
it from a church or whatever, they're going to go enact it in the secular space. I mean, that just
yeah,
seems like absolutely plausible.
yeah,
Um, and I don't think it's a bad thing. You know, we need that. Depends what you're promoting in that space, I suppose. But
yes.
all of this in trying to answer your question, which is wherefore, where's it going? Um, I think that's the direction. In other words, the more we the down the downshot of secularism and atheism has been the loss of the sacred,
Mm,
right?
mhm.
And so we're trying to replace that in other ways. That's where you get all these culty ideologies and so forth, and far this and far that, and the strange factions going on. That's the whole 20th century, basically, right? Usually ends in a lot of death and stuff. So we hopefully don't repeat that. So if we can find new spaces for the religious impulse to emerge in a secular context, there's nothing wrong with uh, 12,000 young girls singing "I Love You," watching their idol on the stage strumming a guitar on a floating bed with a full moon behind her crying. I mean, that's beautiful. That's lovely. It gives me hope, actually. So
Well, you
um,
did touch upon, like, we are seeing a resurgence of music coming back, and it's interesting. Like, you'll see, for example, Kate Bush running up that hill, like, what, 30 something years later, becoming number one again.
thanks
And
to the
then
TV
thanks
show
to
that
the
featured the
TV,
song.
yes, and there seems to be a theme of the gaming world, and just certain films and TV shows that rehash some of a lot of the 80s music that comes back. And but I'm
Well,
curious
I've
because,
observed that phenomenon many times.
yeah,
That every 10, 20 years, I'd say, there's a resurgence of something that was that previous, 20 years.
yeah. Do you think that just
That
is going to
happens
evolve?
on repeat.
Well, I have this whole futuristic. Do you feel like, and here's a question for you. Do you think, like, let's try and expand and, like, no, like, way out of the box, out of the multiverse and all these galaxies and universes? Do you think there are other notes and other harmonies and other melodies and other kinds of music that we haven't even touched on or explored, like, that's futuristic, that may not necessarily be computerized or AI
Sure.
wised?
Well, just the question of tuning alone absolutely has a history to it, and that is likely to continue.
Mm,
What we've settled on at this time, and again in the West, is equal tempered tuning, where the distance between each tone is equal in relationship, and we have 12 divisions to the octave, and that's a very compromised type of solution. Um, which denies us access to the majority of actual harmonic content that is in the harmonic series itself. In other words, we're not really aligned with the harmonic series very well. We're not hearing
mm,
pure thirds, we're not hearing pure fifths uh,
yes.
in the same way. And if you go to like Indian music as an example, you are hearing those intervals, but you're not
Right.
hearing chords, you're not hearing chord progressions. So this is the
Right.
trade-off.
Right.
So I think where there are lots of experiments that have been going on with alternative tuning solutions, and that's been an ongoing temperament. That's been an ongoing quest for quite a long time, because the problem is pitch is spiral, and
Hmm.
to create a usable music a closed system, you have to turn the spiral into a circle, which if you saw that presentation I gave, it's a lot of math behind that, but the gist of it is, how do you make something curved and spiral into a closed space so that you can use it in a self-consistent way? And that's been the dilemma for thousands of years for every culture to solve. And that's why you hear all these different tuning systems in the world, even today, right? It's not just
Right.
12 temperament, there's a bunch of them. And the West didn't always use this tuning either. We've had well-tempered tunings, we've had just intonation, we've had mean tone intonation, Pythagorean intonation. You know, it's so we may continue to we might move past this, or at least we might, as Ken Wilber would put it, you know, transcend and include is probably what'll happen. We'll have that at a core, and we'll build on it. Is likely what
Yes.
it's hard to imagine what that would look like. But there are like 17 note equal temperament. There's 21 EDO. You know, 51. I think there's one where you have 51 divisions of one octave. Which sounds like a
Right.
lot, but that
Wow.
gives you access to much purer intervals
Yeah.
in, you know, that we're not really hearing. And then there's the argument, well, why should we be hearing pure intervals in the first place? Is like, why aren't you being purist?
But why not?
Oh, but when you hear a pure major third, it's like dirty, fluttery, crud. You know, I mean, well, we're used to it. It's okay. It's close. It's not like it's way off or something. You know, what's that guy's name? Jacob Collier. He's done a lot of good around this topic, actually, and he's posted some videos on YouTube. You know who he is, I assume?
No, I've not heard of him.
Jacob
Jacob Collier.
Collier. Yeah, oh yeah, he's toured the world. He's an amazing musician.
Okay.
And he demonstrates this just verbally. You know, he plays an open fifth on the piano. He sings a pure major third with his voice, and then he plays the major third on the perfectly tuned piano. It's sharp.
Wow.
We're not hearing that, you know, and we haven't been for what,
Wow.
300.
See, this is what it's exciting for me, because I sense, and I don't know where it comes from, but I don't feel like we've gotten the full range and scale of these harmonies, these notes, these what you know, I don't have the musical language for it, but I feel like we've only been hearing so much in the last however millennia we've, you know, Earth and humanity have been here, but I feel like there is so much more. It's like people talk about, you know, there are other colors in the spectrum that we don't know about. So yeah,
So
right.
this is the harmonic. This is a visualization of the harmonic series, which is actually a visualization of the vibration of a string, which vibrates in progressively smaller bits and in whole number parts, and that's what generates the overtones of the harmonics. And it just kind of
Mm.
goes up infinitely.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of see that, you know, and ever smaller, ever wider, ever, you might say, farther away. And Western music has followed this trajectory up until we're about here. So maybe we'll just keep going. I don't know.
Maybe it gets more refined, or
Well, that's the idea of 51 half steps instead of 12, right? They
yeah.
would, you know, quarter tones, microtones. There's plenty of microtone music out there already, and there has been for quite 50 years or more. So it's already happening. I think that the real question is there going to be mainstream appeal or adoption of these types of things? That's a harder one. And I'm going to say probably not at first. It's just too complex and hard to hear. It requires a lot of, because we're just going to hear that against what we're used to, you know, and then it's going to sound funny because it's a divergence. So
Unless we make a quantum leap, and that's kind of where I'm sort of going with all these. I can imagine if we were suddenly able to, because you obviously know, with music being healing and not just you know, from the normal sense, but that people are using the crystal bowls and the variations of sound healing, different frequencies and hertzes
yep,
to,
yep,
you know, modulate,
yeah,
and how that's
and I'm
connected to
not
energy and sound. And
sure. I'm not sure yet. I have yet to see convincing evidence that specific frequencies at a specific numeric, because it has numeric properties that are appealing, like 432 or something, that those by therefore directly correspond to some kind of beneficial effect on the body. I think our numbering system is completely arbitrary. There's nothing
Mhm.
432 about the frequency 432, except that we've given it that name, because that's just how we've decided to measure things. Um,
Yeah, well,
you
that's
know,
the thing, isn't it? That they
that's
have
true.
said 432, but then it originally was supposed to be 440 sometime ages ago, and it was
Well, it
bastardized or
is.
something.
It's currently 440. The concert A is currently at 440, and it's standardized across most of the West because of pianos, mainly, and other instruments which are not easy to retune on the fly. So standards had to be made, but it has sort of ascended over time. It used to be lower. It used to be around 415, 420, 425. It's sort of risen across time.
Hmm.
So, but I'm not talking about using that as a uh, concert A. I'm just saying, I see stuff going on the internet where people say this frequency has this effect on you. Boom, end of story. And therefore, dot, dot, dot. So I'm not, I, I read it, I find it interesting. I have yet to see direct, it seems more arbitrary. I think intervals are more likely to have an effect on a person than, in other words, the relationship between two tones, which creates a musical harmony.
Yeah, right.
That is easier to point at and give clear evidence about, how that might affect somebody, as opposed to an absolute frequency, which corresponds to your chakra or your seventh spine, vertebrae or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, I'm
Hmm.
not as
Interesting.
convinced of that, but I'm not saying I'm right. I just haven't seen enough to convince me. But I do think, because music is architecture, it's relationship. Music is number in time,
Hmm.
right? And so it's relationships. Or somebody said once, music is frozen architecture. What does that mean? So because it's a set of interior relationships. So musical intervals, and the dynamism with their interactions, definitely believe that the sound healing and those things, where we could point to some, obviously some intervals are going to be great and others are not going to work very well. The consonance and dissonance idea. But as to, absolute frequencies in and of themselves, I don't know. There are those claims sometimes being made. I keep my mind open, but I haven't seen any evidence yet around that.
Okay. All right. Well, something to explore, and potentially let's see what all the sound and music aficionados and creative types come up with in the next cultural milieu of music. But I
I hope
know
so.
we're sort of close to our time here, and I know that we're going to come back
Yes.
anyway for part 2 and talk about the favorite topic of ours, of everyone, love, and hone in on your book a
Mm.
little bit more, and maybe even then we'll touch on your art as well, and your creativity, and in the photography, and that, and somehow weave all that sort of in. But is there a final parting message that you have that wants to burst forth or come out of you? Because I know we were going to ask you to play a little SC, short for spontaneous combustion,
Yeah.
creativity, composition, which I'll put on at the end of this interview. So whatever Jason feels has come forth out of this little dialogue that we've had tonight, he will do that. But is there any final parting message that you might like to share or leave with the viewers? Maybe some sort of mystery or some element of madness or magic, whatever.
Yeah. I think you said the flow state earlier, and I think that was good. I think I would just wish that, people would make more room, more people would make more room for that type of experience, however they find it, right? Like surfing, whatever it is, that those to seek those flow states. I think that is a very positive experience to have, not only on the individual level, but it filters out more broadly. And that may help us with the quantum leap you speak of.
Well, one can only hope and put it out there into the cosmic ether.
There you
But
go.
thank you so much, Jason, for spending some time with me this evening. And we will be back with part 2. And I'll put Jason's website and details at the bottom so you can find out a little bit more about him and his books that you should check out. I think they're all available on Amazon. But thank you so much. And we'll be back for part 2.
All right. Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.